We good? Oh, yeah. Hey, everyone. All right. Welcome. Super awesome to see so many people in here late on Thursday afternoon. Glad you made it. My name is Bobby Burstock. I'm a partner engineer at DBT Labs, and I'm really excited to welcome you to this session called When the Real World Messes with Your Schedule, Event-Driven DBT Models for the MDS. We're joined by Dylan Hughes, Head of Data for Prefect. Everyone that's here, as well as joining us online, please feel free to pop into the Coalesce When the Real World channel on DBT Slack to join us. And we'll save questions for after Dylan is done. And yeah, really excited to have you all with us. And let's give a big welcome and round of applause to Dylan Hughes.
Hey, everybody. Man, it is good to be back in person, I will say. Much more nerve-wracking, but still good. Good to see you, everybody. So my talk today is about event-driven data pipelines. So we're going to talk a little... Oh. No? Okay. Thank you. So we'll talk a little bit about just like who I am and why I feel like I can talk about this topic. And talk a little bit about like schedules, and then get more into like defining what event-driven data flows even are. And then I'm gonna walk you guys through like a scenario that lets me discuss sort of what we're talking about here just in like some concrete detail. And then we'll outline like a hypothetical system that would work with event-driven data flows, and we'll talk through some failure modes, and then I'm sure there'll be plenty of time at the end for questions. So really the important thing to know about me just overall is that my team at Prefect is essentially responsible for anything that the company builds that isn't the product. So I manage our data warehouse, all of our internal tools, which means that I am pretty much the biggest user of Prefect at the company because all of our like data warehousing and data pipelines, as you imagine, run on Prefect. I also do like SOC 2 and compliance stuff. So I feel like quick show of hands, who in the room has data pipelines that like primarily run on a schedule? All right, who here has any data pipelines that run based on like some sort of event? Okay, so I feel like most of you in the room will probably be pretty familiar with this, or this sentiment or this statement, right? You get a call from somebody, usually a business, somebody in the business says, hey, something out there in the world happened, it doesn't fall in line with your schedule, can you please do X manual intervention so that like X, Y, and Z happens? For me, it's usually, hey, somebody just closed a deal in Salesforce. I want it to be in the report that's going to go out to the executive team at 5 p.m. today on Friday. Can you please rerun like this workflow so that it, my good work shows up? And of course, like I want to respond to that. I want to be good to that. But it speaks to the problem of like the real world doesn't really sit there and work in like 1 hour increments, or 30-minute increments, or 10-minute increments, right? What we're talking about when we're talking about data and the way that data moves around is that we have pipeline runs and then we have events that occur in the world, and generally speaking, they don't line up. I don't know about you, but I always seem to see this reporting gap, and it seems to be the maximum amount of time possible between my last run and when the next run is occurring. But that being said, schedules aren't necessarily objectively bad. It's just that they're good in specific cases. So they're really good in specific cases, such as when you have the ability to have really short intervals with consistent amounts of data coming in that is being used in some sort of aggregate analytic scenario, meaning that like the time between the last run and whatever amount of time it takes to actually process all the data isn't relevant to the business. It's okay that we're waiting an hour or waiting 2 hours or waiting however long. But when this starts to break down is when you want to move data, and particularly your data pipelines and your like warehouse overall, into the business's operational workflows. Because generally speaking, operations don't have the same tolerance for lag as overall analytics work does. Also, when you deal with real world objects or events, they don't happen at consistent times, generally speaking, right? you might have a whole bunch of things that happen at 5 p.m. at the end of a close of business day, and you have nothing that happens throughout the rest of the day, which means all of the other pipeline runs that you've run, depending on how you're managing your compute and what you're doing to spend, maybe just costing you money that is just a waste. And if your input is unreliable, if you get a ton of input at like one particular time and a lot less input earlier or later on, then the mismatch doesn't really get spread out or doesn't get accounted for. So an event-driven workflow is essentially just exactly what you would think it is. It's a pipeline that gets kicked off by the actual event in the world that we're interested in. So it has a couple of advantages in that we only run when things have actually changed, and we reduce our time to insights for our users because the only lag time that we're waiting on is the actual time to process the data. So in particular, if we can do things like have incremental DBT models and keep our runtime short, we can go from the time of the event to the time of when there's actually data sitting in your BI tools and keep that down to under a 10-minute period. So in order to give this some concrete life and sort of a concrete example, I'm going to talk a little bit about a hypothetical scenario. The company that we're going to be talking about is called BlueJet, and it's so it's an airline that has a limited number of aircraft, and in order to offer the greatest number of flights that they can, they perform lots of aircraft maintenance on the fly, and often swap which aircraft will take flight depending on who needs spot maintenance at what airport. And so we have a couple of different personas that we're thinking about in our workflow here. So we've got our maintenance operator, who's actually looking at our maintenance dashboards and ensuring that potentially unsafe planes don't take off. We've got a data engineer who's responsible for the ingest and pipeline coordination. We have an analytics engineer who's responsible for our core models and the transformation. And we have our aircraft crew member who interacts with our maintenance operator in order to communicate about decisions to ground the plane. They've got a few different tools. So we've got a fleet maintenance anomaly dashboard. This is our primary view of the maintenance operator into the state of the fleet, right? So it looks at things like the logs from the embedded system on the plane, any information that comes off the flight, and it also uses some machine learning models to get some predictive analytics about whether or not they think a plane should be grounded. We're also using DBT Cloud, Prefect Cloud. So Prefect is an orchestration tool, which means it helps coordinate your data flows across all of the different tools in the modern data stack. So Prefect helps us say things like, I want to start my 5 transync, and then I want to run my DBT models, and then I want to run my census or my high touch reverse ETL sync so that my data is going back into my operational tools where it's going to be useful to the business. We've also got a hypothetical BlueJet transponder API, which will tell us exactly when the plane has actually landed. So not when it was scheduled to land, or when we think it's going to land, but the transponder goes off when the plane actually connects to the jetway. And then our data warehouse of choice in this example is just going to be BigQuery because that's what we use at Prefect. So we have a particular constraint in this workflow, and it's that we can't retrieve the logs from the embedded systems on the airplane until it's actually connected to the jetway. The plane can't send us logging information from the air. And because we have a shortened window between when the plane is going to next take off, the information needs to get from the plane's embedded systems through our pipeline into BigQuery, into the processed model tables, and then into our BI tool before the plane takes off again. So we're going to be doing a couple of different things here. So the beginning of this workflow looks kind of like this. Our plane is going to land, our API trial gets triggered by the BlueJet system, and that API call is going to talk to Prefect Cloud and kick off a flow run. So in Prefect, we have 2 primary concepts that are important for this talk. We have flows, which are made up of tasks. a flow run is an instance of a flow like occurring in the world, and a task run is an instance of a task occurring in the world. So flows have many flow runs, which contain many task runs. So once the flow run is kicked off, it's going to be responsible for going and talking to the plane's embedded system and pulling logs out of that and pushing them into Google Cloud Storage. It's then going to perform a data validation step, and then it's going to load those logs into the fact table. So, given these constraints, the data engineer and the analytics engineer put their heads together, look at the other data initiatives at BlueJet, brainstorm a couple of distant solutions, and here's what they come up with. So, when the plane, like we said, plane lands, API call, flow run starts, we pull our logs, we perform data validation, and then we load our logs into our fact table. Then we run our DBT models, which is an upstream dependency of two different processes. One is our ML model training, which is important for our maintenance operator's dashboard. And then we also, and the DBT models are what feed directly into our dashboard. And so at the end of the workflow, we're also going to clear the cache on our BI tools so that the fresh data shows up right away. So let's take a look. So this is our flow. We do a couple of things right at the top. We import our primitives from prefect. Right here, we're just importing flows. We're importing a bunch of different tasks that I've written in a different file. And then we're importing the prefect DBT package, which is what we're going to use to kick off our jobs with DBT Cloud. So right at the top, the flow takes in a single parameter, which is the ID of the flight. And then it does as we outlined in as I outlined in that diagram. It's going to go retrieve our flight logs, return us the URI of the GCS bucket, run a validation. If the validation is unsuccessful, the flow will error, and we'll see, the failed run will alert our data engineer so that they can go and take a look at our pipeline. If the validation is successful, we'll ingest the flight logs, which will load them into the fact table in BigQuery. And then we'll trigger our model, and then we'll launch our model training and bust our VI catch. So this process overall, depending on the size of your DPT models and some of the other stuff, can happen in as short as a couple of minutes, which means that every time the plane lands, we can run this can run, and we can be certain that each and every task succeeded when it succeeded, and we can ingest all the logs from all of the different systems in one place to give us like a single view into the operation of our pipeline. Any questions? All right. So the thing that gets tricky about event-driven pipelines is that their failure modes tend to be pretty disruptive. If we get bad data into our fact table, our models won't build, and that means our whole pipeline is stopped until somebody goes in and manually intervenes. Depending on how many flights are happening a day, this could be a major business disruption and potentially mean that planes that are unsafe are taking off. So we want to consider ways that we can prevent that. So if validation fails during the process of ingesting an event, we can use Prefect to send an alert to the data engineer so they can look at the bad data and work with the analytics engineer to adjust the pipeline and the models. They can reprocess the event manually, and since both teams have someone on call, they should be able to patch and diagnose the issue before the plane finishes on-the-ground safety checks, ensuring it's safe to fly. We also have made sure that no bad data has actually made it to our fact tables. So if another plane lands during the time that our engineers are looking at the problem data, we haven't stopped the pipeline. We can keep going. So but data validation doesn't always work, right? Oftentimes it can be a very manual process to be writing all of these specific validation checks, depending on what tools you're using. Even if you have anomaly detection, depending on how long it's been running, it may not be trained up yet. So you can run into some issues where, like upstream, you may be focusing on the shape of the data instead of content, or it may just not be possible to test all of the things in a reasonable amount of time. So if this happens, we will end up with bad data in our table, and the step of the process that's going to fail is actually going to be the DBT model run. This means that any subsequent flights that come in are going to be prevented, like the models will fail to build, the incremental data won't make it into our dashboard, and our maintenance operator is going to be blind. So this is the failure mode that we really need to solve for, because this is what's actually going to prevent subsequent events from being able to run effectively. So, but since we're using prefect and we're in a flow run already, we know which flight is causing the error. And so because of that, we can take some pretty intelligent actions. We can decide that if we fail in the run step for our DBT models, we can, instead of just leaving the data there, we can decide, hey, we're going to pull it out of our fact table, and we're going to push it into a staging area, and then we're going to go ahead and alert the analytics engineer and the data engineer, and then they can take a look at the data and see what happened without disrupting the rest of our pipeline. Once we figure out what the problem is, we can update our validation upstream, and then we can reprocess the initial event, either by re-ingesting the logs or just using the logs that we already have in Google Cloud Storage. And then the pipeline will continue to run, and we'll continue to have safe planes taken off. So what that looks like So one of the cool things about Prefect is that each of these tasks that we're running here has the ability to return us more information than just the return value of like a function. It can actually return us state information. So tasks in Prefect can be in many different states. They can be pending, running, failed, completed. And so we can use this stateful logic to make some decisions here, and we can say, if our job run here, basically we can say, we're going to submit this task, we're going to wait for it to succeed, and based on the state that's completed, we're going to do one or two things. Either, if the state is not completed, we'll perform the steps that we outlined before, where we're going to move our logs to a temporary table, and then we'll alert our on-call. Otherwise, we'll proceed as planned. And the ability to react and respond to failure in this way is what actually makes sort of event-driven pipelines possible. Because if you have data that's moving through your system that's going to be obstructing other data or other runs that are coming subsequently, you can't rely on their pipeline. So it's important to be able to anticipate and respond to failure modes as they occur in an automated fashion, especially depending on the number of events that you're processing in a given day, right? Otherwise, you have to have like huge on-call teams, right? And that's just not an effective business strategy. So, in summary, event-driven pipelines can be powerful, but we need to take extra steps to ensure that they're robust. And not going to clog further events that are coming down the pipeline. We can do this by anticipating different failure modes to sequester problem data ahead of time, which lead to successful pipelines and processes. And as a sort of a final result of this is that we've reduced the time that data takes to get to our DBT models, and we've reduced the time that it takes to get into our business operational workflows, your DBT models can become core pieces of business logic for your business, not just in an analytics sense, but in an operational sense. You can have near real-time dashboards that core business users are relying upon, and they can trust that they're going to be populated in a timely fashion, which ultimately allows you to share your DBT model like logic and magic with the rest of the business. And that's it. Any questions?